This episode commenced on the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia on May 17th, which marked its 20th anniversary. The Flippin' and Vibin' brand, we champion equity, diversity, inclusion, and love, and we stand in solidarity for everybody, specifically in this context for people who have to be resilient from violence and discrimination based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. Remember, it's not because of your identity, it's because of perpetrators, insecurities, and being targets of lovelessness, yeah? So here, like I said, at the Flippin' and Vibin' and the Rehumanization Station, we stand in solidarity with you all. One love. Welcome to the Rehumanization Station. I'm your collaborator, Christopher Jones, aka Dr. X, and this podcast is an extension to my Flippin' and Vibin' brand, where vibers seek to transform narratives around a variety of spaces such as society, culture, education, and sport, to name a few. Today is our collaborative practice series where we have a compassionate viber named Vikki Boliver with us today. Vikki, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. This is a special episode because Vikki is my PhD supervisor. So Vikki is one of the main contributors that led me here. I'll just say that. Right. So Vikki is a professor at Durham University and joined the Department of Sociology in September 2011. Before coming to Durham, Vikki studied sociology at Leicester University, did her BA in Leicester University, Cambridge University, and Oxford University, and was a department lecturer in sociology at Oxford. Also, Vikki was a Newfield Foundation postdoctoral research fellow and visiting lecturer at Harvard, a British Academy postdoctoral research fellow at Oxford, and a social lecturer at Bath Spa. Whew. Wow. See, when I looked at this, I was like, okay, I didn't even.
It's a long list.
And I've known Vikki for, how long have I known you for?
5 years.
5 years? Yeah. About 5 years? It might be 6.
Yeah, possibly.
But yeah, 5 is right. 5 might be right. Okay. Okay, back to Vikki. So at Durham, Vikki co-teaches the second year undergraduate module, Sociology of Education, and the master's level module, Education and Social Inequality. Vikki is program director for the MA in Social Research Methods and co-convener of the university-wide First Generation Scholars Network. Mm-hmm. We'll get into that. We'll get into First Generation Scholars, okay? Vikki's research focuses on social inequalities of access to the most prestigious universities. She's a leading expert on the use of contextual data on the socioeconomic circumstances of prospective university students to inform more equitable admissions decisions. Like I told y'all, we have a special viber with us today, right? So now that we kind of have a chance to see Vikki's bio, we're going to get into our vibing questions, which is the first part of our show. So we will get into more of Vikki's research around social inequalities and access to the most prestigious universities later in the interview. What we will focus on now in this part of the show is Vikki and I will just vibe and allow our Viber audience to get an idea of Vikki's background and personal stories and interests. So that's enough of me talking. Right? Vikki, what's your story? Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, your birthplace,
sure,
your family.
Yeah. Well, you probably know a little bit of this, but maybe not all of it. So I'm from Birmingham originally. Grew up on a council estate, quite a poor area in the 80s. My dad's a postman. My mum was a secretary. Working class family. Went to the local state school where about a third of kids got good GCSEs and most didn't, and most didn't stay on post 16. In fact, we didn't have a sixth form, so most people went out to work, and I did that. I did pretty well at school, but I had never thought about staying on post 16. It just wasn't something that anyone in my family had ever done. It wasn't the norm in my school, so I went out to work. But I was fortunate that the place I worked in a cardboard box factory for 3 years.
Okay, how was that?
It was fun. It was actually really interesting because I was helping to design corrugated packaging for like random products. It was kind of cool, but it was very low pay. It was like £100 a week.
Okay.
It was before minimum wage even existed, so you couldn't live on the money, but I was 16, 17. It was pocket money for me. Okay. But my boss, he was a really lovely guy. He supported me to go to college as a day release student. So I'd get a day off work with pay and go do some art and design course, which I was terrible at. I was no good at art and design. But while I was there, I signed up to do some A-level evening classes.
Okay.
And that just opened up the possibility for me of going back into education. And it wasn't really until I started doing these A-levels at night school and my tutors said to me, well, that you can go to university if you want to. And I was really shocked by this idea at the time, because in my mind, going to university was just for really, really posh people.
Okay.
And I think I imagined that university goers went around in the gowns all the time. Like, I had this really weird view of what... I just thought it was a very upper class thing to do, not for me. But I was encouraged to go. Okay. So as you mentioned in the intro, I went to Leicester University and enjoyed it, had a great time, did really well. And then I went and did a master's at Cambridge, and I got funded to do a PhD at Oxford, and kind of fell into academia.
How did you get funded to do a PhD at Oxford? Like, what was that process like for you? How did that
it's quite interesting, because Oxford's got loads of money, right? So they have their own PhD scholarships, and this one was at Nuffield College. The college was founded, I think, in the 1920s by William Morris of Morris Motors. He'd amassed a massive fortune in the early motor vehicle industry in the UK. So there was a scholarship from his endowment of the college. But what's really funny about that, what's quite ironic, is that both of my grandfathers had worked on the factory floor in William Morris Motors.
Oh, really? Wow, okay.
Companies.
Okay, what a coincidence.
Yeah, so... My dad would say it was kind of reparations. I was getting a scholarship.
I hear that. Okay.
Yeah, so it was pretty sweet.
Okay, and then after your PhD, you did your postdoctorate. You were a postdoctorate fellow.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I got 2 postdocs, which I know is just, I'm spoiled.
Hey,
I was really lucky because my PhD supervisor, Anthony Heath at Oxford, is just a great guy and was very supportive, and he really helped me navigate the post-PhD world. So he drew my attention to these opportunities. He helped me apply for them. He supported me. And yeah, I think I wouldn't have really known what to do without his help. So I managed to go to Harvard for a year. And then I had 3 years back at Oxford where I was able to build on my PhD and get some publications under my belt.
Well, see, I didn't know you went to Harvard. How was Harvard? How was living in Harvard?
It was good. It was good. I taught at Harvard, and that was really terrifying.
Okay. Yeah. What terrifying and what?
Well, I was quite a young, inexperienced teacher then. I taught a little bit at Oxford, but not a lot. Okay. So I was still learning my craft and still learning my discipline as well. So,
that makes sense.
My evaluations were decent, but I was terrified the whole way through, because I thought, like, I'm 24 or something, 25.
Oh, wow, you're right.
Like, I don't really feel qualified to be teaching at Harvard, but I'm just going to wing it and hope nobody sends me home.
Okay, wow, okay. And did you ever go back to the States since then?
Only for holidays.
Oh, for holidays?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Something about your background. What about family, right? Your parents, your mother. How was navigating that and doing your research and your career?
My mother or me as a mother?
Oh, you as a mother. Sorry.
Me as a mother. It's actually not been difficult to combine the two, because I was really fortunate that my kid's dad is a fantastic dad and has been very supportive of me and my career. He's been a very hands-on father, and in fact was the primary caregiver really to our children once they were weaned. I worked full-time and was climbing the greasy pole. He cut his hours back, and he did a lot of looking after the kids and looking after me. So it's an unusual story, but yeah, I was really very blessed in that regard. I think it's a lot different from most other women trying to raise a family and forge a career at the same time.
Okay, nice. Okay, thank you for sharing that. What about activities bring you peace, love, and happiness, would you say?
Oh gosh, I guess I just love hanging out with my kids.
Okay.
Yeah, they just amaze me. They're such sweet human beings, and you think, I can claim a little bit of credit for that, me and their dad, that we have raised them quite well.
Right.
But actually a lot of the credit, I think, is down to them. They've just got lovely personalities, lovely character, and they're so self-aware.
Right.
So we just have the most amazing conversations about emotional well-being and
Okay.
navigating the difficulties of school and friendships. So yeah, if I want to chill and enjoy myself, I hang out with Rosa and Joe.
Okay, nice. Okay, and how old are Rosa and Joe?
They're 14, and Joe just had a birthday, turned 11.
Okay,
So they're growing up fast.
That's a good number.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my favorite number, actually, 11.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but what about any other interests, like maybe like music or something? You like music or?
Do you know, I have a piano in my house that I bought. My husband and I bought it for us and for the kids and for myself on my 40th birthday.
Okay.
I have yet to properly engage with it. Like, I'd love to learn to play piano, but I feel like you have to start kind of early and I don't have any natural talent for it. So we had lessons, me and my daughter, for a while pre-COVID, and then we haven't really gone back to them. But there's something that I really want to do, before my life is over, is actually be able to play a tune on the piano.
Okay, that's cool. I have a friend who's Austrian. My partner's sister's boyfriend used to play piano, and like I didn't realize the intricacies within it, because your hands actually have to like really become really separated, like because he was doing it at a very young age. And they said something about Beethoven as well, like would purposely, like, I don't know, separated his fingers or something like that in order to do certain keys, right? So yeah, piano's cool. Okay.
One day.
Yeah, but okay. What about your research interests? Like, is there any scholars or books that you, as a go-to, like any genres or anything like that?
Do you know, I have a really eclectic influences, so I couldn't really say I'm like a Bourdieusian scholar or a Marxist scholar. I think I'm quite magpie-like in the things that I pick up and mishmash things together. But I think in my particular field of widening access research, there are several people that I really admire. One of them is Diane Ray, who
she has great work.
Mostly qualitative research, and mine's mostly quantitative. But I just love the way that she tells the story of working class experiences of dismissal and being overlooked in education. She just brings out those messages so well. She's a bit of a heroine of mine.
Okay, man, you know what, when you say that makes so much sense when you read your work, because like you said, Diane's more qualitative, right? Yeah. And you're more quantitative, but it kind of crosses over, if that makes sense in a way. Okay, I did not think about. Thank you for that.
I think I probably learned a bit of my own writing craft from reading her, because I like to try and craft a story. Even though I'm mostly presenting tables of numbers, I like to try and have a nice narrative flow when I write, and that's not easy to do. But I think reading Diane's work and other people who are really good narrators has helped me a lot.
Okay. And for context on Diane, where does Diane work right now? Where is
she at Cambridge, or she was?
I think she might be at Cambridge. But within my research, she influenced me to look at the different ways of how students choose, what type of students choose a certain type of university, right? Yeah. And we'll get into more about your research and how access and admissions and what happens during the experiences within higher education context, right? So, but yeah, I never had that thought of that correlation, you and Diane. That's great. That's interesting. Okay. Now, could you think of any other people who have been influential to you in different stages of your life, not just necessarily since you've been an academic or a researcher, but
influential
previously?
In my intellectual life?
Just your life in general, and intellectual, whatever you comes to mind.
Gosh, I've had a lot of people in my career be supportive of me. So people like Mary Waters at Harvard was very supportive when I was at Harvard and then beyond in helping me with the next steps of my career. I mentioned Anthony Heath at Oxford was, helped me to navigate the world of academia. Other people like Simon Marginson at the Centre for Global Higher Education has championed my work, and that's been really, really helpful. I think so many people are very generous, aren't they, within academia? I mean, there's a degree of competitiveness and selfishness for sure in academia, but I've more often found that people are willing to support you and help you. So within the department, Nicole Westmoreland, for example, has been a great mentor to me.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point, because being an early career researcher, there's these ups and downs, right? Especially for me right now, but there are definitely people out there, I know, like you, who are definitely supportive, and it's about holding on to that, right?
Yeah.
That's part of that, the reason why this is like the collaborative praxis series, and how collaboration does, I guess, enhance our experiences, right, and our work.
Definitely.
Okay, so since those are people who have, I'd say, been influential, what have been, you talk about the positives, right? What have been the most challenging moments within your career so far in your life?
Oh, well, I think you'll know yourself that academia can be pretty brutal, both in terms of the workload and the rejections that you get.
Oh, yes.
It's really hard. So I guess early on in my career, getting rejections for job applications and articles, that was really tough, and no one really prepared me for that or told me what I'm supposed to do with that. So it took me a very, very long time to be able to bounce back from early rejections. And in fact, it took me a long time to have the confidence to actually try and publish in the first place. So it must have been about 5 years post PhD before I got my first publication. And most of that time was not because things were languishing in peer review. It was because I was too scared to send them off, or too scared to write them in the first place. And it took me a long time to develop the confidence. And these days I lead a writing course for PhD students. And
I took that course. It's amazing, yo.
Yeah, because I just think I wish I'd had that, for me, to know that you're not born a brilliant writer. You don't know how to do it until you've done it a few times, and you just have to chip away at it. And with a bit of support and encouragement and a bit of kind of structured guidance, that process can be much less painful than it was for me. So I'd say just like getting established as an academic was really tough. And then later on, it was quite challenging when I had some success under my belt, and that came with more work. So
right.
I was really lucky. I shouldn't complain about this. I won like 3 or 4 grants in a row, but it meant that I was working ridiculous hours to try and deliver on these grants, working 70 hours a week. And that's when my kids were small as well.
Right, okay.
So that was really, really difficult, and I would not want to go back to that working pattern. So I feel like I've got to the point now where I feel confident as a writer. I've got a steady stream of work coming through, but I'm not only working and not doing anything else. Okay. But it's taken me 20 years to find that balance.
Okay. If you had one message we've had these conversations, but if you had one message to, I would say, like early career researchers or PhD students in particular, what would you tell them as far as if they want to pursue academia, trying to get something published? I know you've just mentioned a couple of it, but if you have like one specific message, what would that be, you think?
Well, that's a good question. And I don't think I've ever said this to you in the context of our mentoring relationship, but actually probably co-authoring with someone who's an experienced author is a valuable thing to do. I remember one of my first publications was with a colleague called Adam Swift at Oxford, and it was about grammar schools. And he was very prolific. He'd written a lot of things. I did the data analysis, and he led on the writing of the article, and I contributed to it. But because he took the lead, I was able to see how he crafted it and how it wasn't a linear process, and it gave me the confidence as well for us to submit it to the British Journal of Sociology, which is a top-tier journal, which I probably wouldn't have had the confidence to do that without him as a co-author. So I think, establish some relationships with more experienced people who are going to support you and show you the craft, kind of like an apprenticeship in a way, right?
Like a collaborative.
So that's the way you learn, and that's the way that you keep moving as well, because more experienced writers, academics, they've lost some of the fear, so they'll just press on with it and keep you moving. And if it was just you, well, certainly in my case, when it was just me, I was too fearful to keep on with it. So it really, really helped me to co-author. I would encourage people to do that.
Yeah, because I was going to interject with that because Vikki and I have a paper. I did mixed methods with my PhD, and I used the qualitative data for my thesis and a quant data for a separate article. But Vikki and I are going on the end. I had this past month was challenging because I had a few rejections, right? And then our paper got rejected. And Vikki was like, we'll just submit it somewhere else. Like it was like a quick, you know what I'm saying? But like at the time I was like, man, what do I have to do? What do we have to do? But then I guess you just being plain and just being like this and direct and being like, this is what we need to do. It just made me realize, okay, well, this is normal. You just got to keep going. Right. Yeah. And
we just submitted it to the wrong journal. Right.
Right. Exactly.
On reflection. And that's my bad because I suggested that journal, but it was clear that it wasn't the right place. Right. So I think we've sent it somewhere now that will appreciate it. Yeah.
So I think it's definitely time consuming sometimes as well. We've been trying for like over a year to get this paper.
It's probably close on 2, right? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So, but
get there.
But no, definitely that reaction that you had definitely made me think, okay, like, let's just keep going. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that definitely helped me. Thank you. Now that's a bit about Vikki's background. Now we're going to get to the second part of the show where we're going to let's flip it, right? To the flipping the script part. Now we will get more into your work and how you flip the script to traditional narratives within it. I've had a chance to do an overview of some of your research interests that you shared with me. Obviously, like I said, you're my PhD supervisor, so I have an idea of the quantitative work and qualitative work that you do. But for our Viber audience, I would say much of your research is around access to higher education. So for our Viber audience and us too, let's flip the meritocratic script in education, shall we? Now, what are your perceptions of traditional and normative narratives in the work that you do? Like say, for instance, that create like prejudices or inequalities. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so you use the word meritocracy, and this is really the ideology that has prevailed throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century about who's deserving of an education, particularly a higher education, particularly one at a prestigious institution. And the argument goes that a degree is a scarce resource. We should only make it available to the people who most deserve it. And the deservingness of that place at university has traditionally been framed as you deserve it more than anyone else if you have done exceptionally well in the education system so far, so that you have basically the best grades out of everybody. And this is indicative that you're intelligent, that you're hardworking, that if we give you this university place, you're going to, really benefit from it and be great. And I've written about this several times, and in a way that was quite a progressive narrative at the time, because what it was trying to do in part was say that people should have opportunities and should succeed in life based on their individual efforts and talents, right? Not just because their father was someone important or someone unimportant.
All right, thank you for that. So how do you feel like the meritocratic narrative kind of shaped how you viewed education when you were younger?
I guess I took the truth of that for granted, and I thought that the grades that you get in school would be down to your innate ability and your effort. In a way, that kind of worked for me because I did do well at school, but I was relatively exceptional in my school and in my community, and that puzzled me because many of the people that I went to school with and my family members are smart people, right? They're really smart people. They're not very well educated necessarily, but they are bright as a button, really, really perceptive people, really capable of reasoning and learning and, doing complicated things in their work lives and their social lives. So it just didn't make a lot of sense to me, right? That how come many of the people that I know and love are really bright, but they don't have the school credentials to prove that they're worthy in this society.
Do you feel like your lived experiences with your family influenced the work that you do?
Yeah, definitely. So the the work that my PhD focused on was very much about who gets to go to university and who gets to go to the most prestigious universities. And that was definitely motivated by my own biography, because, as I mentioned earlier, like, I didn't think I could go to university until I was about 19, and somebody externally encouraged me to go. When I went to university, I wasn't really aware of the status differences between institutions. Like, I knew that Oxford and Cambridge were special somehow, but the other universities, I didn't know that there was a hierarchy of prestige. So I was really interested in trying to understand, okay, well, how come people like me, from my background, don't go to university nearly as much as more privileged people? And how come we especially don't go to the prestigious institutions? What's going on there? Is it that we don't get the qualifications at school, so we're just not even eligible to go? Is it that when we get the qualifications, we don't know that there's a ranking,
right,
and so we just go wherever? And crucially as well, what's going on at the point of admissions? You know, are the universities wanting to admit us when we apply, or are there biases? Are they basically favouring the privately educated middle class kids, even when working class kids have the same grades? So that's what I wanted to look at empirically.
Okay, and I know you mentioned this happened like during, I guess, when you were 19, right? But can you remember a specific moment that you decided to flip the script to this narrative?
It wasn't until much later.
Okay.
So my early research as a PhD student, and then an early career researcher, so this would be from about 2000 through to, say, 2010, that first decade, I wasn't really flipping the script then. What I was asking was, given that meritocracy is a thing and is, you know, and we accept it is an okay way to view the world, is it meritocratic in practice? That's what I wanted to know. So, you know, is it the case that you get very few working class people and ethnic minority people at Oxbridge? Is that because that's how it shakes out with meritocracy, or actually is meritocracy not actually working as it's supposed to? And my research showed that it wasn't doing what it said it would. So there were plenty of ethnic minority applicants to Oxford and Cambridge and the Russell Group who were being rejected, even though they had the same grades as white applicants. Similarly, for people who had gone to state-maintained schools, they were more likely to be rejected than someone who'd been to a private school with the same grades. So even on the very dubious terms of meritocracy, there was inequality in access to these universities.
Okay.
So, but that wasn't really flipping the script. That was merely just exposing the meritocratic myth as actually not how things work. And it wasn't until a little bit later when I started to think about, hang on, how about we actually directly challenge the notion that the grades that you got in school are a neutral and objective measure of your worth. And how about we say, hang on a minute, surely that's ridiculous. If you've lived a very privileged existence, you've been to an expensive school, your parents are higher educated and wealthy, and you got these grades, how can we compare that with the grades from someone from a working class background, maybe a low income family, no, family or community tradition of going to university,
first generation?
These grades are not comparable. And we need to recognise that if you've had all the privileges in the world, then you should be getting A's and A stars. If you want to go to Oxford and Cambridge, you definitely need those because you've had all the advantages in the world. So come on, let's see what you can do with that. Okay. But if you're not from one of those advantaged backgrounds and you get B's and C's, actually, statistically speaking, that puts you as a really top performer within your social milieu. And I think we need to recognise that.
Okay, that's powerful, right? Okay, so since we're talking about universities like Oxford, Cambridge, and we're at Durham University, could you kind of give just a small overview of what the different types of universities, like, so for instance, the higher tariffs versus and the Russell Group members, stuff like that? Yeah,
well, probably the biggest division is between old and new universities. So the old universities were many of them founded in the Victorian era, some of them in the 60s, some of them much earlier, like Oxford and Cambridge are ancient institutions. So they're the old universities. And then the new universities are ones that were polytechnic institutions. So they were institutions of higher learning, but not universities until 1992, when they got upgraded and we just had suddenly a much bigger university sector. And that division between old and new universities is stuck, such that there's a lower status attached to having attended a new university. And those universities are the ones that have done most of the heavy lifting when it comes to widening access. Right. So that they have much bigger working class and ethnic minority student representation than the old universities. Right. And then within the old universities, you've got Oxford and Cambridge that are just, the crown jewels of the sector. And this is because they're, extremely wealthy. They've got more wealth individually than the rest of the sector combined. Okay. They're just extremely, extremely wealthy. Okay. So Oxbridge is kind of different to anything else. And then you've got the Russell Group, which is essentially a lobbying group of 24 research-intensive universities, including Oxbridge, and they exist basically to try and hoard resources and maintain the illusion that there's something special.
Okay. And what made you focus on these types of institutions within your work?
I think because it dawned on me belatedly in my own educational journey that these status distinctions were a way for the privileged classes to perpetuate their advantages intergenerationally, so pass on from father to son to daughter, whatever, this route into the elite, even though we more broadly had more people going to university than ever before. So you'd think, a 50% university going rate means, oh, great, we've democratized access to higher education, brilliant. No, the truth is, by having a set of universities that are considered better than all the rest, and the middle and upper classes hoarding access to this, they're able to allow the rest of us to have a bit of a university level education without it ever threatening their ability to pass on their privileges and their the access to positions of power.
Right.
Intergenerational.
And how do you think that plays a role in this hidden vertical stratification, if you get me, like this hidden hierarchy?
How do I think the hierarchy plays a role?
Yes. And access, if that makes sense. Or how students perceive and how just the wider public perceive these certain institutions.
I think it's almost like the idea of meritocracy, but in relation to institutions. So it's a popular idea that it's inevitable that some universities will be better than others. And I think one of the ways that that's supposedly evidenced is that some universities have higher academic entry requirements than others. So you need, A's and A stars to come to Durham, whereas you need B's and C's to go to a post-92 institution. And so that's one of the big reasons why there are so few people from less advantaged backgrounds at these elite institutions, because the price of entry is set too high.
Right. And when it comes to access and getting students from, let's say, low income or working class or ethnic minority backgrounds into these research intensive universities, how do we identify, like, because I know you do your work around this, and we have a paper on this, right? So how do we identify like a quote unquote disadvantaged student, and how do we use? I know you talk about contextualized admissions for that. Does that make sense what I'm asking? Okay.
Yeah. So I think that we have lots of markers of disadvantage that we can use to figure out whether someone's had less than ideal circumstances growing up for them to be able to develop and demonstrate their ability through the formal education system. It would be things like, measures of family income growing up, perhaps having been on free school meals. It's often a good proxy. You can use kind of neighbourhood deprivation indexes to see where, what was the community like that people were growing up in. You can also use information about the schools that people went to know that, this is a school that doesn't send a lot of people to university, and yet this young person has done
right.
quite well in their grades and is applying.
Right. Yeah. And then within that, there's challenges, right? So how do you, we talk about these false negatives versus false positives, right? So false negatives are individuals identified as not disadvantaged because they do not live in a disadvantaged area who are in fact disadvantaged. So how do we identify that?
Yeah, I think it's really important if you're going to be trying to use initiatives like contextualized admissions to widen access, that you are getting the intended beneficiaries, and you're not accidentally giving places to people who aren't really disadvantaged, that you just happen to have used a crappy measure to figure out whether they're disadvantaged or not. Some of the work that we did suggested that if you base it on where somebody lives rather than their own household and individual circumstances, there's a big risk that you will end up misallocating contextual offers. There'll be a bunch of people who really deserve to have them who won't be picked up, and there'll be a bunch of people who you weren't intending to target who end up being the recipients of them. Right. So we tended to argue that individual level or household level indicators of disadvantage are preferable to say, what broad neighbourhood did you live in? Because the neighbourhoods are pretty mixed.
You're right.
So you can live in what's nominally a poor area, but yourself and your family be quite affluent.
Right. Okay. And there's also a difference between area and free school meals as well, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Wow. See, and then I guess we've spoken a bit about the low income. You've also, I feel like your work does intersectionality in a way. Right. But what made you do that? Because there's a lot of scholars out there who would just focus on one thing, if that makes sense. What made you interested in not just people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, but also ethnic minority, but I say resilient minority students or majority? Yeah.
So obviously the interest in lower socioeconomic background is biographical, right? And I think you get that a lot in the social sciences, that people do gravitate to topics that have a personal resonance with them. I think I got interested in the ethnic inequalities when I started to work with the data for my PhD, and the numbers showed me that there was a real problem going on there, that the Black Caribbean, Black African, Pakistani, Bangladeshi applicants to elite universities were getting rejected were just sky high, right? And this is when they're well qualified, they've got the grades, they've got the same grades as their white peers, but they're just getting rejected at much higher rates. And those effects were way bigger than the social class ones, right? So it was, I wasn't going to ignore that. That was really, really, really important to make that known. And it wasn't really known at the time, because there was universities have a lot of autonomy, and at the time they didn't have to publish anything about their admission statistics. And one of the things that I'm proudest of with my work is that by exposing these ethnic inequalities in offer rates, the government of the day picked up on that and then started to require universities to publish offer rates broken down by ethnicity, social background and sex. And it has pushed them, because the spotlight's on them now, it has actually had an effect in closing that offer rate gap over time. So I'm really pleased that happened. But if you didn't look at the data, and if you weren't able to publish and draw attention to these inequalities, we'd still be in the same position now, I think.
Right. And so if you're a student out there, Vikki had a big hand in getting certain people from certain backgrounds in specific universities, right? With help with colleagues, right? Within that, obviously we talked about admissions, but what were the challenges and what was the rationale for such disparities, right? Because I know you mentioned that even though similar qualifications, say people from ethnic minority backgrounds weren't being offered places, right? And then some some excuses were, we are, what's the word? Applying for certain subjects, right? Certain subject areas. So like, what were other challenges within the admissions process that have changed over time, but before?
Yeah, people would say of ethnic minorities and of working class people, they would say, well, there just aren't enough suitably qualified people for them to be representative at this institution. It's like, it's nothing to do with us kind of thing. Or they would say, oh, well, it's not our fault that all the Indian kids apply just for medicine, and so they crowd each other out of the competition.
Right.
And I was able to do a bit of research to show that wasn't true. It wasn't that the ethnic minorities were choosing particular subjects and that was reducing their chances of getting a place. That wasn't the case at all. I think it was just prejudice, right? There's not my own research, but other people's research has revealed that elites select in their own image. It's called, I think, homophily, something like that.
Homophily, okay.
Homophily, that is kind of like a birds of a feather flock together kind of
like a nepotism
idea. Like nepotism, yeah. Or just familiarities. It doesn't actually need to be literal nepotism that we're related somehow.
Right.
It's just that you are like me and therefore you are the right kind of person to be here. And I think a lot of that still goes on. A lot of that definitely went on in a really unreflecting way. I think it still goes on, but people are more aware that they're doing it now.
Right.
And there's a more of an institutional awareness that is the risk. That if your universities are full of, I guess, upper class white men, then that's probably going to skew the decisions that they take about who to admit, and so you're going to end up with an entering class that's disproportionately in their image.
Right.
So I think a lot of that was driving it.
And what's actually happening now, because I know women are actually higher. There's higher rates of women now in higher education, right, than men, but not necessarily within, I would say, the academic roles, right, or senior leadership. I'd say, is that similar or a similar ratio?
Yeah, but I don't know how much of that is just a time lag thing, right? It might be that, in 10, 20 years' time, actually, the senior leadership teams will be 50-50 men and women. It's quite possible. I think things are moving in the right direction, certainly. In terms of women being more likely than men to go to university, I think that's particularly true in the working class, far less so in middle and upper class.
Okay.
So it seems to be an issue of working class young men basically not going into higher education. Who's to say they should, right? Who's to say anyone should? Who's to say it is the best option, right, for everybody out of all of the options? Yeah.
But if they wanted to, what do you think are some of the causal factors? Some
of the biggest barriers will be around prior attainment. So, just not having the grades, not having stayed on in school to do the kind of qualifications that help you get access to university.
And that's what led you to contextualize admissions, right?
Yeah.
So how is that going now as far as higher education?
What's really cool is that in the last 5 years, contextual admissions has gone from being considered to be quite a radical, lefty, lunatic kind of idea, for a bit fringe, to being something that almost all high tariff, highly selective universities in the UK now do. There's been a real shift. Durham University has really embraced contextual offer making, and so if you're from a disadvantaged background, the entry requirements are 2 to 3 grades lower than for the traditional social background entrant, which is fantastic. And we're beginning to see that this is exactly what was needed to widen participation. You can't actually do it without doing that. And what's really fantastic as well is that the evidence shows that people who are admitted on contextual offers with lower grades do great at university.
Great, right? Yeah.
They do well. Most of them come out with a first or 2-1 and they do well and they have good careers afterwards. So that's the really important bit of information, I think, that this is not a lowering of standards or a letting in of people who aren't really good enough. Actually, you admit these people, you support them when at university, and they absolutely thrive.
And that is despite certain challenges for students who actually, once they get to the university, right?
Yeah.
So, for instance, for certain students, you have like racism, classism.
Oh, yeah.
And
unfortunately, that is still a huge problem.
Right. So even when students are finally able to populate these spaces, they still have that. They have to be resilient to different factors, right?
They do. So how amazing that they're up against all of that. And if they're from low-income families, they're also having a tough time financially getting through, probably working and still struggling to make ends meet.
Right.
And yet they're thriving on their courses, and they're getting their degree, and they're demonstrating really clearly that they're capable of undergraduate work. And they've got all these additional things to contend with. I mean, that's one of the things that I think we still need to do a lot of work to fix within universities, particularly elite ones, is the culture can be quite toxic.
Yes.
It can be very racist. It can be very classist, for sure. I think those are the two biggest problems. Quite a lot of sexism as well, to be fair. Yes.
Intersectional with ableism, everything's in there, right?
Yeah. And that's really tricky to know how to change, because I think basically the change needs to be made by the privileged students, right, and the privileged faculty members. They're the ones who have to, have a rethink about what counts as valuable and worthy, particularly around culture. So you get a lot of working class students at Durham and students from the northeast at Durham who have a horrible time because they're constantly facing very classist comments from their more privileged peers from the south of England about the way they speak, the way they dress, and
then for context as well, Durham University is in the northeast of England, and the northeast population is within Durham spaces is actually lower than the southern population, right? It's for students, like significantly lower, I'd say. So we're in the northeast, however, but a lot of the culture is regurgitated from the south, I'd say. Absolutely, a bit. Yeah. And I guess that's part of the work that we do, right? We're trying to transform cultures, right? To understand that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. And what about, and that goes back to the as yet unrealized potential. That's one of my favorite quotes that you use. I don't know who you got it from, but I really like that quote. Could you expand on as yet unrealized potential?
Yeah, so it's really just the idea that if you're from a disadvantaged background, then the grades that you have at GCSE and A-level, your high school grades, they do not do justice to what you're capable of. And the idea is that by recognising that at the point of university admission, we have an opportunity as university educators to enable them to realise that as yet unmet potential.
Yeah, right.
So give them a chance and support them to flourish and do what they are capable of, but haven't had a chance to be able to do so far.
Amazing. And I have this quote from around your work on admissions, and I want you to just we've kind of talked about this before, but I just want you to kind of expand on it. So this be like the last part. You said, what is needed is a policy that promotes not only equality of opportunity to apply, but also equality of treatment in admissions. Now, we've spoken about this, right? Could you expand on just each level, right? So we have the admissions process, but then once students get through admissions, they have to have the university experience. Once they have the university experience, they have to graduate and go on to the career. Would you be able to share with our audience a little bit more of your perspective around those three processes that we've kind of just highlighted, if that's okay?
Yeah, well, I think it all boils down to recognizing that prestigious universities were shaped with a particular demographic in mind, and they are set up precisely for fluid movement of very privileged. So, if you think about Durham and the college system and the residential experience of the university, that's designed to be a smooth transition from boarding school, right? Fee-paying boarding school. and all of the rituals, social rituals around the university, the fancy dining, the wearing gowns, the balls where you wear a ball gown or a black tie, engagement in like elite sport. These are all upper class cultures, and they're here precisely because that's who the institution was originally serving. And so I think to make a genuinely equitable experience, we need to see what we can do to broaden out the range of cultures that are represented and available and championed and appreciated in the university space. And it's a bit of a challenge to do that. I think it was more of a challenge previously, prior to the improvement on widening access that we've had in the last few years. I think it's easier now to actually diversify the cultural space that is the university, because we do have more working class students, we do have more students from Black and Asian backgrounds. It's still not a lot, but it's a lot more than it was when I joined the university 12 years ago. It has changed a lot, and I think you need the you need the numbers, the critical mass.
You need the representation.
Yeah, representation kind of has to precede it, and unfortunately that means for the sort of the early cohorts who are building up that representation, the experience is not very nice.
Yes,
because the culture is still in transition.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. Fantastic. Now, this is my last question within this section, right? Our flipping the script part. So where do you see yourself, your work leaving a lasting legacy and positively impacting others? You kind of brushed over this a bit earlier, but I want to give it a bit more.
I feel like I have managed to help with a couple of things already. So definitely shining a spotlight on ethnic inequalities in admissions chances and making universities be publicly accountable for those practices. I think that I've had a hand in that, and I'm really proud of that. I've had a hand in the rolling out of contextual offer making, and I think that has had a demonstrable impact on the socioeconomic diversity of elite universities. The thing that I'd like to in the future have an impact on is really what we've just been speaking about, to do with the culture of institutions and how diverse and inclusive they are at the cultural and social and interpersonal level. And I'm still scratching my head as we all are over exactly how what do you need to do to change, to transform a culture. But that's where I see my work heading in the next sort of 3 to 5 years, trying to grapple with that.
Don't be surprised if we have some work coming or we try for some grants.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. I was going to mention, because the ethnic inequalities, that's what drew me to Vikki's work. Just shed light a little bit on my experience. So I originally was going to do criminal justice and a PhD, and that kind of got rejected. So I quickly looked at Vikki's work. It was ethnic inequalities in education specifically, and I framed my research proposal around that. And Vikki didn't know who I was. I just emailed Vikki, and you just said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it."
We had a couple of calls, didn't we, when you were in the States?
Yeah, we had a couple of calls. We had, was it Skype? We were on Skype.
Probably,
right? It was Skype. But you immediately said yes. There wasn't even no hesitation. So you're just like, how are you going to get funding, etc. Yeah. So like I said,
you had good ideas, and it was needed in the moment as well. I think things have moved on a bit, and you were at the forefront, I think, of doing that research and looking at Black student experience, and it was really, really important and really needed.
Thank you. Yeah, because it's all about that solidarity, isn't it, as well? All right, now we're going to get to the concluding part, right? So we are now at the concluding part of our show, where Vikki will offer us insight around rehumanization. If you could reflect on your journey thus far, what do you know now that you wish you knew before?
What do I wish I'd have known before? That's a tricky one. I don't know. You need to give me a bit more of narrow it down for me.
Okay, I'll narrow it down. Okay. Sorry.
That's broad.
What about, wish you knew before? You kind of touched on this earlier though, but maybe during your, when you realized you wanted to do you wanted to go to higher education. once you started navigating that, what did you wish you knew before that you found out then?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know whether this was your experience with your PhD or not, but mine was that I always imagined that a PhD required something so brilliant that it was almost unattainable.
Unattainable, I was going to say. Okay.
And that how could anyone except a genius, i.e. not me, do that? And I was surprised by, you still have to do good work to get a PhD, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as Nobel Prize winning kind of as I thought it was. And I think my whole life I've always thought that the standard was rather higher than it actually was. And that's put me off or made me hesitate or made me doubt my ability to do things. So I kind of wish I would have liked someone to tell me earlier on what you're doing is good enough, more than good enough to get that accomplishment, and that would have taken a lot of pressure off,
Okay. I mean, that makes perfect sense. I do definitely agree with that. And especially because you're a first generation as well.
Because you haven't got a clue, right, as to what's expected of you. So you do magnify it in your mind.
Right. Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm not first generation, but I do feel the same way. I don't really, at least from the PhD side, I didn't have anybody in my group or in my family that I knew had that experience. So
until you get through that Viva, you don't know whether you're good enough, do you? But
that's true.
Clearly you are.
Yeah, when you get to those spaces, like, man, like, I'm here, but we'll see. Yeah, but okay, that's good. Okay, good point. Okay, now we're down to the last question. Are you ready?
Yeah.
What does rehumanization look like to you?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really like the term that you use, the rehumanization, because I think it's a really useful way of reminding us that we're all people, whether we're disadvantaged by the structures of society or advantaged by them. We actually have, our humanity absolutely in common. And I think for me, take my work on contextualized admissions and my work exposing racial inequalities in university offer rates, they were both trying to push back on the deficit model of working class people, of ethnic minorities, pushing back on this idea that that they're not represented at the universities because they're just not good enough. Yeah. So, and I see that as a rehumanization process, trying to say, hang on a sec, this is not about individual deficit, this is about structural inequality. And if you look at it a different way, you'll see that these people are amazing and they're accomplishing a lot despite massive obstacles.
Right.
So for me, it's partly that, but lately I've been thinking it's also about how we think about the privileged as well, because it'd be very easy to demonize the privileged and just be kind of annoyed with them. But you have to obviously remember that they're people too, that they are shaped by structural inequalities and the history of the society in ways, in a very similar way. They just happen to be on the plus side of the equation, right? So I think having it, for me, rehumanization also means approaching, understanding how the privileged behave and think in a compassionate way, recognizing that they're people and that a lot of their privilege isn't linked to them being bad people, or selfish people, or indifferent to the suffering of others.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and I think only by taking that sort of compassionate approach can you ever hope to get people on side and bring them together to figure out, okay, we talked about how do you make university spaces more inclusive culturally. You're probably not going to do that by telling the privileged kids that they're bad and wrong, right?
Right.
Yeah, you're not going to bring them with you that way. You've got to figure out a way to recognise the legitimacy of them behaving in ways that are culturally familiar to them, whilst at the same time challenging the exclusionary practices that come from that.
Right.
So yeah.
Because that reminds me a lot of the work that I do, and thank you. That's a great answer. Because
I've learned a lot from supervising your PhD, because I think you do a great job of that, a great job of real kind of compassionate view of the experiences and the ways of thinking of both the privileged and the disadvantaged groups within a race framework, and it's similar for socioeconomic think. So I've definitely learned a lot from your work.
Yeah, I think just for context, so I've even expanded it. So I used to say victims and perpetrators. Now I use the word targets. Some people agree, some people don't, but I prefer that we're all targets in this system, and we all kind of have these attitudes of where we perpetrate at times, and we can all learn from that. But then again, everything you mentioned, it does leave a bit more labor to people from our backgrounds. But
It does. But okay.
Cut from a different cloth. Is that resiliency that gets us through, right? Yeah. Thank you for that. That was great. It was an amazing answer. Thank you. All right, that's everything. So, what? Do you have any social media handles or platforms people can follow you on?
Twitter @Vikki Boliver.
Vikki Boliver. Anything else? Any Instagram, LinkedIn, IG?
No, I just do Twitter. Okay, that's it.
All right, Twitter. Okay, and also you can follow me at Christopher X_AB on pretty much all the platforms. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Vikki, for coming. It's amazing talking to you. Everyone, one love. Okay, y'all. Sheesh. Some reflections. Yeah, that was amazing. See, I told y'all Vikki, our compassionate viber, was with us today. My PhD supervisor, like I said before. Without Vikki in this game, I don't know where I'd be. It'd be very interesting, but Vikki gave me the opportunity, and I've done everything I can to take advantage of it, right? And today we talked a lot about admissions, contextualized admissions, universities, cultures, and experiences. And it was enlightening today because obviously this is some of the work that I do as well, but getting to know Vikki a bit more was fun. I didn't know some certain things about Vikki, but it was great. I hope you enjoyed the show. But one of the main things I got out of it was, personally, I just say Vikki's story. It was good to just, because we've done things outside of academia, just lunch and stuff, and it was good to actually sit down and talk to Vikki about her journey and what she's gone through. Yeah, like today was a special episode. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and thank you again for joining the Rehumanization Station.